Hello and welcome back to another episode of this Milwaukee Brewers March to October. We officially are in the playoffs. In the last episode, we clinched the division and then it just ended up simulating all the way to the end of the year. So I was kind of upset because once it simulated past the end of the year and then the next moment was in the playoffs, it wiped the stats page. Like, obviously it didn't wipe the stats, but like if I go to the Brewers stats page here, there's just nothing, and I kind of wanted to do a stat recap video. I'm still gonna do that. That's what this video is. It's just gonna be a little tougher, and there's not an easy way to compare everybody's stats on the team, but I'll still go through everybody's stats individually and just break down who did good this season and who didn't. Spoiler alert, a lot of people did good. So the first thing I want to recap is just the standings across the league. So we had a 107-55 record. We were 24 games up in the division. We won the division by 24 games. The Cubs were in second pretty much the whole year. I mean, they were in first until we took it, and then they were in second until the Cardinals made a push. Didn't get the Cardinals anywhere. They still didn't make the playoffs, but this was it was a competitive division. I feel like the second half of the year, my team just really heated up and then just left everyone else in the dust. So it's not like everyone else in the division was bad. I mean, there was two other teams that finished over 500. It's just that we were so good that no one else really had a shot. But then if you go and look at the NL East, the Mets won that division with a record of 91-71, and then both the wild card teams were from this division. The Braves and Nationals, really closely contested division there between those top four. That's kind of how I imagined it to look at the beginning of the real season, but I don't think it's quite shaping. I mean, it's competitive, but it's not shaping up like this. But the top four teams separated by 5 games, with the top 3 all making the playoffs. Then we move over to the NL West. The Dodgers took that one pretty easily. The Rockies coming in second with a record of 83-79, but nowhere near the Dodgers' record of 102-60. And then, well, there's a wild card, but this, I kind of wish I didn't take a sneak peek in this because, my reaction already happened. But the New York Yankees went 117-45. That officially is the most wins ever in a season. Like, I looked it up just to make sure. Nobody's ever had 117 wins. 2 teams have had 116. It was the 2001 Mariners went 116-46, and then the 1906 Cubs went 116-36. There were 10 less games. So technically, the 1906 Cubs, I think, had a better record because their winning percentage was higher, but they didn't have as many wins as this Yankees team. And how many times does a team that gets 101 wins come in second in the division? Like that, there are 4 good records this year, 4 records over 100 wins, and 2 of them came from the same division. And even the Rays didn't even have that bad a year. There was no way that anyone was competing with the Yankees. Like, imagine getting 101 wins and still losing the division by 16 games. That's just crazy. But then in the AL Central, this one was not a very good division. That's pretty obvious. The Indians won it. The White Sox actually came in second. They couldn't quite get to a 500 record, though. Indians won it pretty easily. And then in the AL West, the Astros won it, not by as big a margin as you'd really... maybe not the as big a margin part, but not really as many wins as you'd think the Astros would get. The Mariners also got the wild card spot. So that's it for the records. Those are the teams that made the playoffs. And now let's get into the stats. So I think I'm just going to look at the stats from this screen. I'm just going to go onto the pitching rotation and lineup screen to find these stats. And I'm going to press triangle on everybody. The first thing, though, I wanted to point out is that I was right in the last episode. Both Corey Knebel and Jimmy Nelson both were not eligible for the playoff rosters, so we're stuck with Ulis Chassin I'm not sure. Actually, maybe I can. Okay, they do let you do a 4-man rotation for the playoffs, so I think that's what I'm gonna do because I don't really have too much faith in Chacin. But we'll see how this works. I don't know if I'm gonna keep it like this, but anyway, we're here for the stats, so we'll start off with, I guess, technically the ace of the rotation. Although I would honestly say all 4 of these guys are equal. But Freddie Peralta, this is his upgrades throughout the year. You know, obviously March to October is still a franchise mode at heart. So potentials and upgrades and training and stuff still comes into effect even if you're not in control of it. So Freddie Peralta over the course of this season got some pretty nice upgrades, pretty nice progression here, +9 to his walks per 9. But he had an official record of 17-10, pretty solid there. He threw for over 200 innings, so that's actually really good. He gave up 194 hits and walked 86 batters and struck out 244. So another thing I'm kind of upset about is you can't, well, at least I don't think you can see the league leaders at the end of the year, which that's what I was really interested in. I don't think there'll ever be a way to go back and look at that. But that's what I wanted to look at here. And Peralta might have been sniffing the top of the league leaders in strikeouts. He kind of was all season. In 244, he seemed to have made a late surge. So that could have gotten him at the top. 3.11 ERA. This is just an all-around great season out of Freddie Peralta. Move on to Brandon Woodruff. He got some nice upgrades. He had, honestly, a similar season to Peralta in everything except the strikeout. Same record of 17-10. 204 innings pitched with 173 hits allowed, 62 walks allowed, struck out 180 batters with a 3.03 ERA. So he had less strikeouts but a slightly better whip, less hits given up, less walks. So Woodruff also had a really good year. Corbin Burns, he got some nice upgrades. He had a really similar record, except he didn't have the amount of losses that the other 2 guys had, but same amount of wins. 17-4 was his record. Didn't quite make 200 innings pitched. Got to 197. Gave up 190 hits, 56 walks, and struck out 171 batters with a 3.60 ERA. So he's probably the weakest out of these top 4 guys. But he still had, I mean, that's still a good season. 3.6 ERA, that's not bad. Almost 200 innings pitched. 17-4 record. I mean, I know record doesn't really matter, but it's still just really solid year out of Corbin Burns. And then Zach Davies, I know we had a month of simulation that I didn't see any stats, but he was at least probably our best pitcher. Let's see if he stayed that way. No, he kind of took a dip at the end of the year. He still ended up with a record of 19-6, so the most wins on the team. Couldn't quite get to 20, though. 225 innings pitched. That is almost seemingly unheard of. 204 hits allowed with only 50 walks allowed. He got up over 200 strikeouts with an ERA of 3.12. So honestly, all 4 of those pitchers had very similar seasons. Like, they all were just so solid, similar records, similar ERAs. And I mean, that's kind of a surprise because none of the guys are like aces, but none of them suck. So I was just kind of expecting middle of the road seasons for everybody. But all 4 of these guys had such a good year. The only one who didn't is the guy I just took out, Ulyss Chacin. He actually seemed to put it together a little bit because I know his ERA was up in the 5s for most of the year. But he got that down to a 4.83 ERA, 167.2 innings pitched with 185 hits allowed, 59 walks allowed. So obviously he did not have nearly as good of a season as the other guys, but still not like disgustingly horrible. I mean, he did okay, but yeah, just not the best season out of him compared to the other 4. And then the bullpen arms, there's, well, Junior Guerra, almost forgot about him. Honestly, I'll just say real quick, Junior Guerra, Taylor Williams, and Alex Wilson are 3 guys that I barely ever used. Like, I don't even know if I used Junior Guerra at all throughout the season when I played. Alex Claudio I didn't use too much, but I did use every once in a while. But Junior Guerra ended the season with a 2.43 ERA, struck out 37 guys in 55.2 innings pitched. That's, I mean, out of a 69 overall, that is a good year out of the bullpen. That's a good, solid guy. He looks like he's in the spot of long relief. So he probably came in situations where either we were up by a ton or down by a ton. So, I mean, keeping the game where it was, I guess. Pretty solid season. Now over to Alex Claudio. He got some actually pretty good upgrades throughout the season. And he finished with a 4-1 record, 33 strikeouts and a 2.56 ERA and 59 2/3 innings pitched. Another really solid season out of another kind of middle-of-the-road arm in our bullpen. I forgot to look at Junior Guerra's record. It was 1-0. Okay, it doesn't really matter too much. Now, Taylor Williams. This guy, another really solid year out of the pen. 4-1 record, 40 innings pitched, struck out 43 batters with a 2.43 ERA. I mean, all three of these guys so far with an ERA in the middle twos. You can't ask for much more out of those guys. Now, Alex Wilson, I think he was the one who struggled. Yeah, he struggled a lot. He went 2-5 with his record. Struck out 48 batters in 56 2/3 innings pitched. He also had a pretty bad and high ERA of 5.88. Not the best year out of this guy. But if there's only one guy in the bullpen who gave up that many runs, that's a good year out of a bullpen. I think Jeremy Jeffress actually turned his season around a lot too, because I know at the beginning he wasn't doing too well. But yeah, he ended up with a 3.12 ERA, only 26 innings pitched though, 24 strikeouts. So he turned his season around. He did not pitch much though. I kind of wish he would have pitched a little bit more, but that's fine. You know, as long as he turned his season around, he did pretty solid. Now, Jacob Barnes. This is the man right here. If you were watching this series, you know this is the 8th inning man. Whenever I was playing the game, this guy was the one who came in the 8th with a lead. He always kept that lead, it seemed like. Finished with a 9-1 record out of the bullpen. That's pretty solid. Struck out 41 guys in 49.2 innings pitched with a 1.63 ERA. He really limited his runs there. I think he gave up the same number of runs as Jeffress and about double the innings. So a good season out of him, 14 holds. I really liked what I saw out of him. And then last but not least, we have Josh Hader, our closer. He finished the season with actually some pretty good upgrades to his control stats and home run per 9. That's nice to see. He finished with 45 saves, so I don't know where that places him in the league leaders. I know it's not first because Will Smith for the Giants was having a pretty good year. I think he was already at 45 before that last month of the season, but still a high number of saves for Josh Hader. 3.17 ERA is not too bad. 66 strikeouts in 54 innings pitched. Not quite what he usually does, but still a big number of strikeouts for a closer there in that amount of innings pitched. He did really well. I really liked Josh Hader. I always felt confident when I brought him in the 9th. Now over to our position players' stats. And honestly, so many of these guys, when I would check up with them on the season, were putting together such good seasons. Now, before I click on anybody, and I also don't know how to see MVP on March to October, but before I click on them, I know that I was thinking that Yelich and Braun were both in the MVP race. And then at the end of the season, Travis Shaw kind of came out of nowhere. I don't think he probably wasn't in MVP talks at all. But he kind of matched Yelich and Braun in terms of home runs from what I saw. And then his average all of a sudden shot up too. So I'm curious to see what kind of season he ended up with. But we'll just go right down in the order here, and then we'll go over to the right and look at our bench. One more thing before I click on Kane, though, is with a month to go in the season, I remember looking at my team stats. I'll actually go here so that all the bench guys are over on the right instead of one guy being in at DH. One thing I noticed with about a month left in the season when I checked in on the stats was that not everyone, but at the time, I think the only 2 people without 20 home runs in my starting lineup, like my everyday lineup, were Kane and Arcia. Arcia was at 19, so I'm sure he got to 20, and Kane was at 16, so he might have gotten to 20 also. So if they both got to 20, then every single one of my everyday starters hit 20 or more home runs. That's awesome. Like, you can't really ask for much more production out of your lineup all the way up and down. So we'll start out with Lorenzo Cain here, 32 years old. He actually got a lot of upgrades throughout the year. Upgrades to power, vision. His contact was what went down. And I know he did have a low average throughout the season, but I think he was getting it back up at the end. And he actually did finish with 20 home runs and his average up over 270. He must have had a really strong last month, because I know like the whole season his average was in like the 230s, and then after the break he was slowly building it back up. And then I think in the last game I played he was like upper 250s. So he must have had a really good end to his season to get that average up over 271. Also hitting 20 homers, driving in 85 runs out of the leadoff spot. That's a career best right there. 163 hits, 41 doubles also. I mean, the average was down for him, but the overall production for Lorenzo Cain was probably up there with some of the best he's ever had in his career. Now, I was going to click off of him, but I probably should go and look at his WAR, wins above replacement. He was at a 5.2 wins above replacement, which is slightly below his last 2 years, but it matches his 2015 year, which I think was supposed to be his best year on I don't know. Now we'll go ahead and look at Orlando Arcia. He was one of my favorite players to use on this. He seemed to always do good for me, and then especially after I made the Billy Hamilton trade, because there were 3 different times, actually I think 4 different times, that Andrelton Simmons was somebody I could have traded for, and he is a much higher overall than Arcia. But at the time, Arcia was hovering around a 300 average with decent power numbers, and I didn't really want to not get rid of him, but not have him in the lineup. So I decided not to get Simmons, and then Arcia just kept it up and did really well in the second half. So I'm excited to see what he finished with. Look at his upgrades. I mean, not like the upgrade. I know I've mentioned the upgrades, not like they matter, because I'm not gonna like continue this as a franchise on the channel. But plus 10 to his power versus righties. I mean, he really did put up power numbers. He only got 1 more home run though, okay? Because remember I said he was at 19 in that last month. He only got 1 more, but he did end up getting 20 home runs on the season. Couldn't quite get that average up over 300 though. He was over it pretty much the whole year, so he must have had a little bit of trouble in that last month. His average dipped below 300, but still a great year. Definitely the best year of his 4-year career, I guess. At least 4 years of the stats. 20 homers, 81 RBIs. Struck out 107 times, so that is the most of his career, but he also had, well, I guess he didn't quite have more at-bats than the 2017 season, but just everything across the board for Arcia was solid. And his wins above replacement was at a 3.7, so that's a big swing, because this year, the year before, he was at a negative almost 2, negative 1.9, so that's a swing of about 5 wins. So Arcia contributing a lot to this team. Now the guy that everyone's probably most excited to see what kind of season he had, Christian Yelich. He didn't feel like the best player on my team throughout the whole year. Like, he always felt like he was having a solid year, but he never really felt like the best player. And even I personally didn't do that great when I used him. Let's see, he ended up batting exactly 300 with 42 home runs, so he had a little bit of a power surge at the end. Driving in 113 RBIs and 175 hits, 33 doubles. This is a season right here. You know, honestly, comparing this season to last season when he won MVP in real life, he might have had a better season this year. I know the average was down. He got a lot less hits. Well, maybe not a lot less hits, but the average was definitely down 26 points. But he hit 6 more home runs, and walked 20 more times just about and struck out almost 20 times less. So I don't know. I would almost say he had a better season this year than his actual MVP season last year. And he also finished with a wins above replacement of 6.1, so really nowhere near his last season in terms of wins above replacement, but still a really solid season all around. 42 home runs. That's a good total right there. Now on to Jesus Aguilar. He was surprisingly solid in terms of batting average throughout the whole year. He was always up at around the 280s. And let's see, yeah, he finished with 286 average, 29 bombs, driving in 84 runs. All four guys we've looked at so far have driven in over 80 runs. So that's really nice to see. He had a few less homers and a few less doubles, but more hits overall. So Aguilar surprisingly was more of an average hitter than a power hitter this last year. I mean, he still put up power numbers. 25 or 29 home runs is nice. It would have been nice to get one more though. Then I would have had 3 or 4 guys over 30 home runs, because I know 2 other guys did. But yeah, good season out of Jesus Aguilar. Got the strikeout numbers down, walks up, hits up, looking really good. And he finished with a wins above replacement of only 1.8. So I don't really understand how, like, it seems like all around his season was better than his last season in 2018. But I know wins above replacement depends on the position and depends on who's doing well in the position. So maybe first base as a whole was a lot stronger of a position in this season, and that's why his wins above replacement number was down. But now we're on to Travis Shaw. I'm excited to see what he ended up with, because like I said, he was making a surge at the end of the year. His average was almost at 290 after it was at like 260 the whole year. But let's see, he ended up batting 279. Okay, so his average didn't continue to climb. His home runs, though, he hit 35. That's a really solid amount from a guy like Travis Shaw. Not really meant to be a star player, but certainly filling his role. So yeah, 35 home runs, driven in 94 runs, 77 walks, and he got his strikeouts under 100. I mean, really good year out of Shaw, too. I'm so happy with everyone who I've looked at so far. So many people had a good year. Now we're going to move on to the first person who probably did not have a good year, though. And that's Mike Moustakas. The whole year, his average was way down. And, I mean, let's be honest. I think, just based on when I've been checking in on stats, he's probably, I don't want to say the worst player on the team, but in terms of what the stats show, he's probably the worst player on the team. But when the worst player on your team is hitting 25 home runs, driving in 85 runs, you don't have that big of a weakest link. I mean, obviously his average was down, all of his slash line was down, but still putting up a pretty solid power performance with 25 home runs, driving in 85 RBI. Still, everybody I've looked at has over 80 RBI. His strikeout numbers did go down a lot, though, so he must just not have been making great contact on everything. That's why his average was down. But honestly, so many stats still, he did really good. And Yasmani Grandal also, I'm pretty sure, had a good year. He was hovering around the 300 average mark for a lot of the year. So I'm curious to see what he finished with. 285, okay, so he couldn't get it up over the 300 mark. But still, look at this season out of a catcher hitting. Like, there's not too many good hitting catchers. And especially average-wise, ever since his rookie season, hasn't hit anywhere close to the average he put up in this one. But his power was also there, 22 bombs, 16 doubles, 66 RBI, so he's the first one under 80 runs driven in. But still, 66 isn't, like, horrible. 131 hits on the year. I mean, this guy, he was just solid all year round. And I also forgot to look at the wins above replacement for the last two, but I think Grandal's wins above replacement was really good. Yeah, 6.6 wins above replacement for Grandal. So he really asserted himself as probably the best catcher in the league, at least for this season in the game. And next, this is the guy I'm most excited to look at his final stats for all year. This guy was putting up big numbers. Ryan Braun had a major career resurgence in this year, and I know he was probably fighting for an MVP spot. So let's see what he ended up doing in his 35-year-old season. Yeah, he really must have struggled at the end. I mean, just face value, looking at his stats, obviously a great year, but for most of the year, his average was in the 330s, 340s. So the last month of the simulations, he must have struggled, probably took himself out of any sort of MVP race, but still finished the season with 37 home runs, 109 RBI, his walks at 66, his strikeouts at 77. I'm so happy with how Ryan Braun did in this. I had his player lock that I played pretty early on. I got 2 pluses for him, and I think that's what drove him to have such a good year. I mean, you compare it to 2011 when he won MVP, he put up pretty similar numbers. I mean, the average wasn't quite there. Stolen bases weren't quite there, but he hit more homers, and I think drove in almost the same amount of runs. But, I mean, when you can have a comparable season to your MVP season when you're 35, and that MVP season was like 8 years ago, that's a good year. I mean, he really filled his role on this team as a solid veteran, and he was a lot better than solid. So now moving over to the bench, these guys, I'm pretty sure they all had really good seasons too off the bench. Eric Thames, he was really good for me. At least in the first half, he was more good for me coming off the bench. He ended up with 10 home runs, so he got over 10. His at-bats were down from the last year, but that's especially once I got Billy Hamilton, then he wasn't playing as much in the outfield. But he still had a really good year, 277 average. He was hitting for a lot more average. Power was still kind of there. He drove in a solid number of runs off the bench. I am overall really pleased with how Eric Thames' season ended up. Now over to our backup catcher, Manny Pena, and I know he was batting over 300 for a lot of the season. He looks like he couldn't quite end up with over 300 average. 285 is what he finished with. 8 homers, drove in 33 runs, 39 hits, 3 doubles, even hit a triple at one point. But another really solid guy off the bench. He seemed to just be Yasmani Grandal when Yasmani Grandal needed a rest. Like, honestly, these numbers look so similar to Grandal's, especially like the average and those numbers. And I'm pretty sure if you did the math, his home runs and stuff like that, all the other ones, they probably averaged out to be really similar to Grandal's year. So Manny Pena did a really good job filling in for Grandal when Grandal needed rest. And then we have Hernan Perez, another one of my favorite players to use. I was just so good with him. The best part was that walk-off 3-run homer he hit off of Felipe Vasquez at one point in the season. He finished with 12 home runs. He played a lot more than probably the rest of the guys on the bench. He did get into almost 100 games, 303 at-bats, 12 bombs, 43 runs driven in, averaging at 284. I mean, it's just, he's so good. All 3 of these guys so far have been so good off the bench. And that doesn't change when you get to Ben Gamel. I bet he kept his average over 300. He was in the 360s for like the first half of the year, and then it kind of came back down to earth a little bit. But I bet he's still, 331 average over the course of the season. He actually played in a lot of games. I wonder, he must have been the computer's favorite pinch hitter, because he played in 113 games, got 181 at bats. So most games he was probably only getting 1 at bat. He only hit 2 homers, but like I said, batting for 331 average, driving in 19 runs. That's a really, really good season out of a bench guy. And then finally, Billy Hamilton, the guy we traded for halfway through the year. He wasn't really a bench guy. He was platooning with Aguilar, but right now he's on the bench. And I mean, if you look at his upgrades, that's real. I mean, his power versus left went up 15, so he put up decent power for Billy Hamilton standards. He hit 11 home runs with a 269 average, 44 stolen bases. Not sure if that ended up leading the league or not, but I mean, a really solid addition to the team halfway through the year. I brought him mostly for defense. He hit pretty well. I think this is honestly his best hitting year of his career, probably by far, actually. Pretty much double the homers he hit in any other season. A lot more runs driven in, a lot higher average. This is probably Billy Hamilton's best year of his career, so we got him right at the right time. I don't really know what these fielding stats are going to show. He finished with a 5.4 wins above replacement. Wasn't expecting that. But yeah, Billy Hamilton, good acquisition at the end of the year. And that's it for the stats. It looks like the only two players on my team who didn't hit double-digit home runs were Manny Pena and Ben Gamel. And if you add theirs together, they would have hit exactly 10. So, a lot of power from this team. A lot of good stuff all around. The lowest average was Mike Moustakas with like 229 or 230. But, like, the distance between his average and everyone else's, like, everyone else was... I think the next lowest might have been Billy Hamilton with 269, if I'm remembering right. But yeah, everyone on this team just seemed to play so solidly and have such a good year. I wish there was a way to look at it. I don't know if there is, but I would be curious to see if Yelich was anywhere near winning MVP. I don't know what kind of a season. Actually, I think I can look at it from here because I think, yeah, I can go to other teams. All right, give me a second. I'm going to go to the other guys that I thought were in the MVP race. All right, so first off, the guy I thought was in the MVP race was Ronald Acuna Jr. He was having a pretty good season throughout, putting up good power, solid average. I think Yelich probably ended with a better season than him. I think he had more runs driven in, more homers. The average was only 1 point less. So Yelich would probably beat him out. But what I was not expecting is I looked at his teammate before I looked at him, Freddie Freeman. The whole year I was checking these league leaders. Freddie Freeman was nowhere really to be seen. All of a sudden, he ends the year with a 349 average with 41 home runs, 111 RBI, so and 219 hits. So I haven't seen the other guy yet that I thought was in the lead for most of the year, but I would not be surprised if Freddie Freeman was the one who took home MVP. But the other guy who I thought was a front runner for the MVP was Nolan Arenado. Definitely not anymore because Freddie Freeman blew him out of the water and well, not blew him out of the water, but he came out of nowhere. He had a much higher average in OPS than Arenado. A couple more homers, a couple more RBI. Arenado, yeah, does not compare to Freddie Freeman. So I bet that Freddie Freeman was the one who ended up winning MVP. And one last thing I want to check in on because I'm really curious. I don't know if you remember, if you guys were watching earlier, near the All-Star break of this March to October, I gave a little spotlight to JD Martinez. I think at the All-Star break, he had 35 homers, 90 RBI, and was batting like 350. So he was just having an insane year. So I'm really curious to see what kind of numbers he ended up with. So let's look right here. He had 58 home runs with 161 RBI. Oh my God. 212 hits, 329 average. If this guy didn't win MVP, well, I mean, there is Trout. I kind of want to look at Trout too. But this guy put up such a crazy season at the plate. 58 home runs. Jesus. Alright, so yeah, Mike Trout put up some pretty good numbers too. Seemed to have his best season of his career, just looking at face value here. But he hit 42 home runs. I think that's a career best. Yep. Drove in 108 runs. It's not quite a career best. 327 average. That's a career best. 188 hits. That's not quite a career best. Let's see his WAR, because he's always the wins above replacement king. 11.1 wins above replacement, just under what he got last year. Oh, unbelievable. I mean, I don't think this would be enough to beat JD Martinez. I mean, 58 home runs out of Martinez. But you never know. You never know what this game gives a bias to. Well, anyway, I think that's going to do it. I apologize if this ended up being a little bit longer of an episode. I really wasn't expecting it to be, but I love looking at stats, so I got a little carried away. In the next episode, we'll be starting the postseason, playing against the Nationals, trying to win that game. So make sure you come back for that one. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you don't want to miss the rest of this, we're in the postseason now. So you might want to hit the subscribe button to see the rest of this March to October. But until then, that's it for me, and I will see you in the next one.